And if the policeman had not arrived just then, it would have gone badly for the fat-fleshed one. She would have flown headfirst off the rampart, but since the policemen were stern folk, the cause of order was postponed, and the fine boys, after some more clamoring, went home. Still, the triumph of the free German woman was coming to an end of itself. That night, as soon as she closed her eyes, she heard a suspicious noise outside, and at once understood that it was all over for her. In her nightgown, barefoot, she rushed to the window to avoid at least the disgrace of being put in a cage like Klementinka. But it was too late. The strong arm of Pan Szyszulski held her firmly by the waist, while Nelka Devilovskaya, in unprecedented fury, demanded an answer. "Is it true, Hasia Malka, that you deceitfully usurped power and were pleased to falsely call yourself mayoress, thereby leading many simple people into temptation?" Miss Devilovskaya said. "True," Amalka replied. "Only not deceitfully and not falsely, but I was and I am a mayoress according to the most veritable truth." "How did this ridiculous idea come into your bitchy head, and who taught you to do that, bitch that you are?" Miss Devilovskaya went on with her questioning, ignoring Amalka's response. Amalka was offended. "Maybe there is a bitch here," she said, "only it's not me." No matter how many questions they put to Hasia Malka after that, she was scornfully silent. No matter how they tried to get her to acknowledge her guilt, she refused to do it. A decision was taken to lock her in the cage with the wayward Klementinka. Terrible was the sight, says the chronicler, of these two wayward hussies given by a third hussy, a still more wayward one, to devour each other. Suffice it to say that by the next morning there was nothing left in the cage but their stinking bones. On waking up, the Foolsburgers were astonished to learn what had happened, but this did not trouble them. Again, they all went out and started congratulating each other, kissing each other and shedding tears. Some asked for the hair of the dog. "Ah, deuce take them all," said the dauntless staff officer, gazing at this picture. "What are we going to do now?" he asked the deputy mayor in anguish. "We must get to work," the deputy mayor replied. "Here's what. Why don't we spread a rumor among the people that this rogue Anelka ordered Polish churches to be put everywhere in place of our Russian ones?" Brilliant! But toward noon, the rumors had grown still more alarming. Events followed one another incredibly swiftly. In a soldier's suburb, another pretendress showed up, Dunka Fat Heels. And in the Streltsy suburb, the same claim was made by Matrinka Nostril. Both based their rights on having been at the mayor's more than once for delicacies. Thus, the need now was to repel not one, but three mayoresses at the same time. Both Dunka and Matrinka were unspeakably outrageous. They went into the street and knocked the heads off passers-by with their fists. They went single-handedly against pot houses and demolished them. They caught young lads and hid them in the basements. They ate infants, cut women's breasts off and ate them too, letting their hair loose in the wind in nothing but morning negligees. They ran around streets of the town as if frenzied, spat, bit, and uttered unseemly words. The Foolsburgers simply lost their minds with horror. Again, they all ran to the belfry, and it was even impossible to figure out how many persons were killed and drowned there. A general trial began. Everyone remembered all sorts of things about his neighbor, things that it was impossible to dream up. And since the trial procedures were brief, all the town could hear was splash, splash, splash. By 4 p.m, the police station caught fire. The Foolsburgers ran there and were petrified, seeing that the visiting official had burned up without a trace. Again, there was a trial to investigate who had caused the crime, and it was decided that the fire was caused by that thief and wastrel, the fifth Ivashka. They hoisted Ivashka on a rack, demanded a sincere admission of everything, but just at that moment, the small cockroach farm caught fire in the cannoneer's suburb, and everyone dashed there, leaving the fifth Ivashka hanging on the rack. The alarm bell was sounded, but flames had already spread far and wide, burned up all the cockroaches. Then people caught Matrinka Nostril and began quite politely to drown her in the river, demanding that she tell who had prompted her, a veritable wastrel and thief, to undertake this thievery and assisted her in it. But Matrinka only produced bubbles in the water and did not betray any associates and accomplices. Amid all this general alarm, the rogue Anelka was completely forgotten. Seeing that her enterprise did not work out, she stealthily moved back to her boarding house as if she had nothing to do with anything, and Pans Szyszulski and Szyszulski set up a pastry shop and began to sell decorated gingerbreads. Only the fat-heeled Dunka remained, but there was no way of handling her at all. "Brothers, you absolutely must get rid of her," Sila Terentievich Potbellyov admonished the fine boys. Sure, just go try, deft as you are, the fine boys responded. This was already day 6 of the uprising. What took place then was moving and unprecedented. The Foolsburgers suddenly plucked up their courage and performed the modest feat of saving themselves. Having killed and drowned a whole lot of people, they had reasons to conclude that now there was not a whit of sedition left in Foolsburg. Only loyal citizens survived, therefore they boldly looked one another in the eye, knowing that no one could be reproached for Clementinka or Eradka or Matrinka. They decided to act unanimously and to start by getting in touch with the suburbs. As might be expected, the first to step forward was the dauntless staff officer. "Compatriots," he began in an emotional voice, but since his speech was a secret one, naturally no one heard it. Nevertheless, the Foolsburgers waxed tearful and began urging him to take back the reins of government, but he firmly refused to do so before Dunca had been caught. There were sighs in the crowd, exclamations, "Ah, great are our sins," but the deputy mayor was unshakable. "Fine, boys, those in whom there's any sedition left, come forth," a voice in the crowd barked. The crowd was silent. "Everybody's clean?" the same voice inquired. "Everybody, everybody," the crowd droned. "Cross yourselves, brothers." They all crossed themselves, and a people's general campaign was announced against Dunca Fatheels. Meanwhile, the suburbs, one after another, kept sending the most comforting messages to Foolsburg. They all unanimously agreed that sedition should be uprooted. And first of all, each of them should purify his own self. The most touching message came from the suburb of Halfwits. "Therefore, brethren, test yourselves diligently," the local people wrote, "that sedition not make its nest in your hearts. Be sensible, not evil-minded before the face of the authorities, but be most diligent, most praiseworthy, and most obliging." As this message was being read, sobs were heard in the crowd, and a suburban woman, mangy Axinia, inflamed with great zeal, poured 40 kopecks out of her purse right on the spot to make a foundation of capital for catching Dunca. But Dunca refused to surrender. She fortified herself in the big bedbug farm, armed with a cannon, which she used like a rifle. "What a sly dog, such tricks with a cannon," the Foolsburgers said, not daring to go near her. "Ah, may the bedbugs eat you," exclaimed others. But the bedbugs also seemed to be on her side. She set whole hosts of them against the besiegers, who scattered in horror. They decided to defend themselves with pitch, and that seemed to work. Indeed, the bedbug sorties ceased. But it was still impossible to get near the house because the bedbugs formed rank upon rank, and the cannon went on sowing death. They tried to set fire to the bedbug farm, but there was little unity in the actions of the besiegers, since no one wanted to take upon himself the duty of being the leader, and the attempt failed. "Dunca, surrender, we won't lay a finger on you," shouted the besiegers, hoping to win her over with wheedling words. But Dunca responded with coarseness. Thus it went on till evening. Night fell, and the sensible besiegers retreated, having left a line of patrols by the bedbug farm just in case. It turned out, however, that the strategy with the pitch was not without consequence. Finding no food beyond the boundaries of the fortress and roused by the smell of human flesh, the bedbugs turned inside, seeking to satisfy their bloodthirstiness. In the deep of the night, Foolsburg was shaken by an unnatural scream. It was fat-heeled Dunca giving up the ghost, being eaten by the bedbugs. Her body, which was literally one wound all over, was found the next day lying in the cottage, and beside it the cannon and countless numbers of squashed bedbugs, the rest of them, as if ashamed of their deed, hid in the cracks. This was day 7 since the beginning of the uprising. The Foolsburgers exulted, but despite the defeat of the internal enemies and the disgrace of the Polish intrigue, the fine boys were somehow uneasy because there was neither sight nor sound of a new mayor. They loitered around town like poisoned flies, not daring to undertake anything since they did not know how the new superior would like their recent endeavors. At last, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he arrived. The newly appointed veritable mayor was the state councilor and chevalier, Semyon Konstantovich Epikurov. He immediately came out to the rioters on the square and demanded to see the ringleaders. Stepka Loudmouth and Filka Luckless were handed over. The new superior's wife, Lucaria Terentievna, graciously bowed on all sides. Thus ended this worthless and ridiculous violence. It ended and has not been repeated since. News about Epikurov. Semyon Konstantinovich Epikurov was the mayor of Foolsburg from 1762 to 1770. A detailed description of his activity as mayor has not been found, but since it coincided with the initial and most brilliant years of Catherine's epoch, we should suppose that it was probably all but the best time of its history. The Foolsburg chronicler mentions the person of Epikurov 3 times, first in the Register of Mayors, then at the end of the report about the time of troubles, And finally, when it narrates the history of Foolsburgian liberalism, see the description of Sullen Grumble's term as mayor. These mentions all show that Epicurov was a progressive man and regarded his duties more than seriously. It must not be thought that the chronicler willingly made such a biographical omission in the history of his own town. Rather, we should suppose that Epicurov's successors deliberately destroyed his biography as witnessing to too much obvious liberalism, which could serve the explorers of our history as a tempting pretext for looking for liberalism, even where, in fact, there was nothing but the principle of liberal flogging. This surmise is partly justified by the fact that to this day there exists in the Foolsburg archive a page evidently belonging to the full biography of Epicurov, marked up to such an extent that, despite his efforts, all the publisher could figure out was the following. Being of no small stature, allowed for the firm hope that, but overcome with horror, was unable to fulfill, remembering that, spent his whole life in sorrow, that is all. What did these mysterious words mean? Naturally, it is impossible to give a fully reliable answer to that, but if guesswork may be allowed in such an important matter, we could suppose one of two things. Either that Epicurov, being of no small stature, about 7 feet, was supposed to have some special talent, for instance, for pleasing women, but did not prove equal to expectations, or that he was entrusted with a certain charge, which, being frightened, he did not fulfill, and then felt sad all his life. Be that as it may, Epicurov's activity in Foolsburg was undoubtedly fruitful. The fact alone that he introduced mead and beer brewing and made mandatory the use of mustard and bay leaf proves that he was the ancestor in a direct line of those bold innovators who 75 years later fought wars in the name of potatoes. But the most important undertaking of his mayorship was undoubtedly his memorandum on the necessity of establishing an academy in Foolsburg. Luckily, this memorandum has survived in its entirety and enables us to pronounce a perfectly fair and impartial judgment. The publisher allows himself to conclude that the thoughts expounded in this document testify not only that in that distant past there were people with a right view of things, that it could serve even now as a manual of realizing undertakings of this sort. Of course, our present-day academies have a somewhat different nature than the one Epicurov planned to give them. But since power is not in the name, but in the essence implied in the project, which is none other than the scrutiny of learning, it is obvious that as long as the need for scrutiny holds sway, Epicurov's project will retain all its significance as an educative document. That names are arbitrary and rarely change anything was very well proven by one of Epicurov's successors, Wartbearden. He too petitioned to establish an academy, and on receiving a refusal without further reflection built a jailhouse instead. The name was different, but the proposed aim had been achieved. Wartbearden could not wish for anything more, and who could tell whether an academy built by Wartbearden would have existed for long and what fruit it would have borne. Maybe it would have turned out to be built on sand. Maybe instead of scrutinizing learning, it would have begun propagating it. All this is in the highest degree conjectural and uncertain. As for a jailhouse, that is a sure thing. It is sturdily built and will not deviate anywhere from the line of scrutiny. This is the thought that Epicurov develops in his project with such indisputable clarity and consistency as sadly no one possesses nowadays. Of course, he was not as resolute as Wartbearden. That is, he did not build a jailhouse instead of an academy, but resolution was not generally in his character. Should we blame him for his shortcoming? Or on the contrary, should we see this circumstance as evidence of his inclination to constitutionalism? We leave the resolving of this question to the present-day examiners of our country's past, whom the publisher hereby refers to the original document.